recommendations so that policies will feel that will be in line with the pulse of the public to meet public aspiration.
Questions. Question number 1, Honorable Michael TIEN. Some discipline service staff have related to me that it has been nearly 10 years since the government last conducted a comprehensive review of the salary structure of discipline services. And during this period, the pressure and difficulties encountered by them when they discharge duties have grown day by day. In reply to a question raised by me on the 8th of February last year, the government indicated that it would consider whether there are justifications for conducting GSRs, that is, grade structure reviews, under the existing policy framework, but no progress has been reported since then. In this connection, would the government inform this Council, 1, of the respective number of applicants for positions in the various discipline services in each of the past 5 years, whether it has studied into the relationship between such number of job applications and job duties and remuneration packages, if it has, of the details, if not, whether it will conduct such a study. 2, as it is learned that 7 firefighters and 5 police officers died on duty in the past 10 years, showing that firefighting does not pose less danger than police work, but the remuneration package for firefighters is inferior to that for police officers who are remunerated on an independent police pay scale of comparable ranks. How the government responds to the demand for a review of firefighters' salary structure, as what firefighters and unions have over the years been striving for. And 3, of the details and progress of the study carried out by the government on whether there are justifications for conducting GSRs for discipline services, whether the government will commence GSRs for discipline services shortly, with a view to responding to the aspirations of discipline services and the public on improving the remuneration packages for discipline service staff. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for the Civil Service. President. The government fully recognizes the effort and contribution of colleagues in the discipline services, especially those on the front line who have all along stayed committed to their duties, upholding law and order as well as rescuing people in distress. As with all other civil servants, the government's pay policy for discipline services is to offer sufficient remuneration to attract, retain and motivate individuals of suitable caliber to join and serve continuously in the services. Following this policy principle, the government determines appropriate salaries for discipline service staff under the existing improved civil service pay adjustment mechanism and keeps under review the conditions of service and benefits so as to offer a remuneration package that can attract and retain talent effectively to provide quality and professional services to the public. In addition, we understand that discipline service staff have to face ever-changing circumstances and challenges in performing their duties. To ensure that they have adequate manpower and equipment for meeting different operational needs, the government provides them with the required resources in accordance with the established mechanism. With regard to manpower, a total of about 6,800 posts have been created in various discipline services over the past decade, and the total establishment of the relevant departments has increased by about 11%. We have also taken a host of measures for the discipline services, including the introduction and enhancement of various job-related allowances, reduction in conditioned hours of work, improvement of housing benefits, and implementation of construction projects of discipline service quarters, with a view to keeping abreast of the times the conditions of service and benefits of the discipline services. This is also important for attracting and retaining discipline service staff, as well as boosting their morale. Furthermore, if there are proven and persistent recruitment and retention difficulties, or if there are fundamental changes in the job nature, level of responsibilities and job complexity of any grade, the government will consider a grade structure review or GSR for the grade according to existing policy. Having consulted the relevant bureaus, I now give a consolidated reply to the various parts of the question. Number 1. The respective number of applicants for positions in various discipline services in each of the 5 years in the past are set out in the annex. Overall speaking, the number of applicants for discipline service positions each year far exceeded the target recruitment number. For instance, the number of applicants was 30 times the target recruitment number in 2016, indicating keen competition for the positions. This reflected to a certain extent the attractiveness of the remuneration and benefits of the discipline services. Number 2, as regards the remuneration package for firefighters in the FSD, I wish to point out that each discipline service is unique and it is not advisable to compare them directly. Regarding the suggestion of a GSR for FSD, what is important is whether the department is facing genuine and persistent difficulties in recruitment and retention, and whether there have been any significant or fundamental changes in the job nature of personnel in the individual grades of FSD. We'll continue to maintain close communication with the management and staff side of FSD and consider the justification for conducting a GSR for the department with respect to the relevant policy guidelines. At the same time, we will examine the problems faced by various grades of the department. The aim is to introduce measures that are operationally necessary and practicable for alleviating the difficulties and pressure encountered by FSD personnel in their day-to-day work and for enhancing safety. Specifically, the FSD has been given approval to create a total of more than 1,400 discipline grade posts over the past decade, and the overall establishment of the department has increased by close to 15%. In terms of facilities and equipment, apart from the Fire and Ambulance Services Academy, which came into operation in early 2016 to enhance training for fire and ambulance personnel, each year the government allocates funding to provide better equipment, vehicles, vessels, operational tools, and protective clothing for FSD staff to ensure the safety and efficiency while performing duties. On staff benefits, the government has, in the past few years, introduced and improved job-related allowances for FSD staff, which cover such duties as high-angle rescue, handling of hazardous materials, as well as urban, mountain, and underwater search and rescue operations. In recognition of the special skills possessed by staff of the various specialized teams, the government will also seek funding from this council as soon as possible for the construction of FSD discipline staff quarters at Pak Shak Kok, Chang Kwan O to cater for the housing needs of FSD staff. Number 3, as mentioned above, according to the existing policy, the government will consider conducting GSR for individual grades if they meet the established criteria. However, a GSR is not a panacea for all kinds of manpower-related issues. It is equally important to improve human resources management measures. We will continue to closely monitor the situation of the discipline services and maintain good communication with both the management and staff side of the relevant departments. We will follow up on the suggestions for GSRs in a fair and impartial manner, as well as to explore the best ways to handle the issues that they face. President, we have always been proud of our professional and effective civil service, of which the discipline forces are an integral part. Members of our discipline services are never daunted by hardship and are always courageous and committed in carrying out their duties. I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude for their efforts. We will maintain close contact with the management and staff side of these discipline services and relevant bureaus to discuss and follow up on matters of common interest. Mr. Michael TIEN. President, if I may refer to paras 2 and 3 of the reply, let me read this out. When will there be such a review? It depends on whether there are genuine and persistent recruitment and retention difficulties, and whether there are fundamental or significant changes in the job nature. And para 3, if this fits the criteria, there will be a GSR. My question will be very simple. You have the established criteria. Are those what I read out in para 2? If not, please let us know what are the established criteria. And if they are what I read out from para 2, then it is even more simple. In other words, if there are no problems in recruiting and retaining staff even up to 2047, there will not be a review unless it is in your view that there are significant or fundamental changes in the job nature. If that's the case, which department will decide whether the job nature of discipline services has undergone significant or fundamental changes? Is it for your bureau to decide? Secretary. My question is clear, right? Thank you, Mr. TIEN, for your supplementary. I mentioned the established criteria. It was a policy that was made by the Executive Council in 2009. We will give comprehensive consideration to recruitment and retention situations. From the figures, you can see very clearly the situation. I told you about recruitment just now. Perhaps I can also say that members might be worried about wastage. But overall speaking, the civil service has a very stable wastage rate. In 2016-17, there were 7,800 civil servants who left, or 4.8%, and 80% was about natural wastage, and the resignation rate was only 15%. And overall, the resignation rate was 0.6%. It stands at a very low level. Compared to the discipline services, these are broadly comparable. Apart from looking at recruitment and wastage, we also need to see whether there is significant or fundamental change in the job nature. We'll consider whether such changes will have an effect on the effective operation of the grades, so much so that we need to have a GSR, and so that we can have a new GSR to improve the situation. In the past, the CSB explained to the PS panel what we meant by significant or fundamental change in job nature. We told you about the definition. Now, in simple terms, when the administration studies the job nature and the complexity of job duties and the relevant changes, and whether they comply with the criteria for GSR, we'll consider whether these changes are fundamental, so that we need to change the grade, its objective and its positioning, so that the grade can continue to serve the public effectively. We'll continue to maintain contact with the management and staff of different departments to keep in view the changes in job nature or the challenges the staff face, to consider whether it is necessary to conduct a GSR for improving the situation. We'll continue to communicate with them. As I said, we'll have to look at the core issues. Can we deal with the issues through other arrangements? Because a GSR is not the panacea for all kinds of manpower-related issues. We'll look at manpower, equipment, allowances, working hours, provision of quarters and training. This is a whole basket of measures that can be taken to improve the daily operation of the departments and the difficulties the staff face. Mr. Michael TIEN, President, my question was who would decide whether there are fundamental changes? Did the Secretary say it was him? My question was about who would make the decision. The reply is very clear. If you are still not happy, please follow up on other occasions. Mr. Michael LEUNG, President, our outstanding discipline services are an important cornerstone for Hong Kong's stability and prosperity. They also protect the life and limb and property of the public. The Secretary's reply is highly unsatisfactory. It shows that he is not emphatic or empathetic. Even if you have no problem with recruitment, it doesn't mean you are paying people enough. The discipline services face a lot of risk, they face a lot of pressure, and they are challenged, charged, and also provoked when they conduct frontline work. I can't see how you care for them. I don't see any empathy on your part. I'd like to talk about 2 points. One, on the medical front, they are waiting as the public for public medical services. Can you take out private medical insurance for them? Mr. Look, please come to your supplementary. Yes, I know. And then quarters. Discipline services are facing housing problems. Mr. Look, please ask your supplementary. The lower grades are waiting for 4 to 7 years for housing. I'd like to ask for the actual progress for GSR and whether you have a concrete plan to do it. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Look, for your supplementary. Before I assumed this post, I was the PS for security for 5 years. I think I know the problems faced by discipline services much better than many of my colleagues. We have been fighting for resources for the discipline services. Look at the police. The police have to handle political matters, and when the frontline officers have to be engaged in public order events, they face a lot of pressure, and FSD fights fire, but there are old tenement buildings and mini storages. There are latent fire risk in these places, and this adds to their challenge. I fully understand and sympathize with the situation. As I was saying, we'll have to see what difficulties the discipline services face, and we can handle them one by one. Mr. Luke mentioned 2 aspects. One, medical. Actually, discipline service staff, if they are injured on duty, they can access the A&E department of the Hospital Authority for medical care, and also at QEH and also in Edward Youde Hospital in the Eastern District. We have the Employee Occupational Safety Center to provide dedicated service to government staff who are injured on duty. And starting from 2015, we started a pilot to tackle minor injuries sustained on duty. If discipline services staff are in this situation, they can go to 11 designated clinics under the HA, which are dispersed around the districts. These are general outpatient clinics. And also we have 2 other plans to benefit them. Number 1, they can make use of the Chinese medicine reimbursement scheme to go to registered Chinese medical practitioners for care, and a certain amount will be reimbursed. And it will be capped by the daily limit in the Employees' Compensation Ordinance. And for private doctors, starting from 2014, we have started the reimbursement of medical expenses scheme. If government servants are injured on duty outside the office hours of the Occupational Safety Center, they can go to a private doctor for medical care, and they can apply for reimbursement of the medical expenses. And it is again capped, as I said. The member also mentioned housing or quarters. In 2014, in the policy address, the CE said that there would be the speeding up of the construction of 8 disciplinary service quarters, and the target is to provide 2,200 units by 2020. This is being carried out, and the ASD is helping with the projects. It is studying the projects, and these will come to LegCo for funding at the appropriate time. we are speeding up the provision of quarters, so discipline service staff do not have to wait that long. Mr. Leung, you have asked 2 questions. The Secretary has given you a detailed reply. If you have other questions, please follow up through other channels. Ms. Ann Chang. Thank you, President. When an employee continuously and incessantly makes a request to the employer, I'm sure it is well-founded and unfairness must be involved. Let us look back. When the FSD was set up, it was subsumed under the police, and it was for a whole century before it was made another department. That is why the remuneration package of the FSD is now inferior to that of the police. My question is, President, in the main reply, you said that the suggestion of a GSR for FSD, what is important is whether the department is facing genuine and persistent difficulties in recruitment and retention. If you look at the annex, in the past 5 years, every year, people who applied for civil service positions in the discipline services in the past 5 years, there was only one department which experienced low figures all the time. In 2012, FSD, 21,383, and by 2016, it was reduced by half. There were only 11,374. What's the reason? But if we look at the other correctional services, Ms. Ann Chang, please ask your question immediately. Yes, Secretary. This is a consolidated reply. You have not given a clear reply to the FSD. My question is this. You said you would communicate with them again for a GSR review and also salaries. When will you do that? Thank you, Ms. Chang, for the supplementary. Actually, with the management and staff of the FSD, we are maintaining close contact. On different platforms, we meet with them and discuss with them the latest situation. Maybe I can also comment briefly on the manpower situation in the FSD. In the past 3 years, the resignation rate of the FSD is extremely low. It was 0.36%. This is way below the level of the entire civil service. It is lower by 0.01%. Well, the resignation rate is 0.38%, but 70% happened within the probationary period. Therefore, in terms of recruitment and retention, the FSD has not experienced huge difficulties. It is not that if there is not a problem, we will not continue to listen to them about the aspiration for a GSR. But I repeated just now that we have to act under established policies. We need to be fair and impartial while we continue to liaise with the management and staff of the FSD with regard to the latest situation, including job nature. Certainly, when we have conclusions, as Mr. TIEN was asking, I can also answer him now, we will take the issue to the Executive Council. And we will invite the Standing Commission on Discipline Services, Salaries and Conditions of Service to see whether they agree that there are justifications for making that study. I'd like to remind members that you can see only 3 members were able to ask questions because you were talking on end. In fact, supplementaries should be precise and concise, and I hope that the officials can also give precise answers.
Question to the Honorable Wilson OR. Thank you, President. It has been reported that to better realize the benefits of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macao Bridge, or the HZMB, the authorities of Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macao are studying the introduction of a park and ride arrangement. Residents of the three places may, upon obtaining a one-off permit, drive a private car not issued with a vehicle license for use in a place of destination to cross the boundary via HZMB and park the car in a car park in the closed area of the boundary control point in the place of destination, and then change to local public transport together with the passengers on board after going through immigration clearance. On facilitating private cars to use the bridge, will the government inform this council, 1, of the progress of the authorities' discussion with the authorities of Zhuhai and Macau on the aforesaid arrangement and the consensus reached so far on the permitted duration of stay after entry, the quota and eligibility criteria for application for such permits, etc. 2, whether it will consider providing a car park in HZMB Hong Kong boundary crossing facilities for inbound private cars to dovetail with the implementation of the aforesaid arrangement, whether it knows the measures to be introduced by the authorities of Zhuhai and Macau to complement the aforesaid arrangement, if it does, of the details, and 3, of the number of cross-boundary private cars issued with both Guangdong and Hong Kong vehicle licenses in each of the past 3 years, whether it has discussed with the authorities of Macau in the issuance of Macau vehicle licenses for Hong Kong private cars. If so, of the details, including quota and eligibility criteria for application, if not, the reasons for that. Thank you. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, President. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macao Bridge is the first cross-boundary land-based connection for Hong Kong, Zhuhai, and Macau. With the HZMB, the traveling time between Hong Kong and the western part of the Pearl River Delta region will be greatly reduced, and the western PRD region will be within 3 hours drive from Hong Kong. This will reduce the transportation costs and time for land-based commuters and goods. It will enhance the economic development and connections among the cities of Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Bay Area, the Bay Area, facilitate the movement of people in the area, and have strategic significance for the development of Hong Kong as well as the Bay Area. To facilitate traffic and enhance the usage of the bridge and maximize the economic and transport benefits of it, the governments of Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau special administrative regions have been actively studying and discussing the cross-boundary transport arrangements to meet the needs of residents, travelers, and trades of the three places. They have already agreed to arrange different types of cross-boundary transport for travelers to suit their various needs. We will also put in place a public transport interchange at the Hong Kong port, providing different types of local public transport for traveling between Hong Kong port and other districts in Hong Kong. My consolidated reply to the various parts of the Honourable OR's question is as follows. On quoting the question that the three governments are studying a park and ride arrangement, I wish to clarify that according to information provided by the mainland, the Zhuhai Bridge does not provide a car park for inbound private cars, nor is there a plan to do so at Zhuhai Port. As regards Hong Kong Port, according to the project design of the HZMB, there will be no inbound park upon commissioning. The Civil Engineering and Development Department and the Planning Department are conducting a feasibility study of the topside development at Hong Kong boundary crossing facilities islands of the HZMB to explore how to optimize the land at the topside and underground of the Hong Kong port for commercial and other economic uses. Subject to the study results and decided land use, the government will proactively consider the feasibility of providing parking spaces, including those for inbound cars at the topside development to meet the parking demand of residents and inbound visitors. As regards Macau, there will be an inbound car park at the Macau port providing up to around 3,800 parking spaces for Hong Kong private cars. There is no quota required, but prior reservation must be made. After parking and completing immigration procedures at Macau Port, visitors may take other transport to other areas of Macau. The two governments are finalizing the detailed arrangements of the inbound car park at the Macau Port and will make an announcement as soon as possible. According to the discussion of the three governments, cross-boundary private cars using the HZMB are mainly regulated by a quota system. The three governments will allow qualified cross-boundary private cars to travel between Hong Kong and Guangdong and Hong Kong and Macau via the bridge with reference to existing quota system for Guangdong-Hong Kong cross-boundary private cars. Guangdong and Hong Kong governments announced in December 2017 that the number of quota of Hong Kong cross-boundary private cars using the HZMB to Guangdong will increase from 3,000 to 10,000 to respond to the public demand, and the quotas were valid for 5 years and are being allocated. The discussion on the quota arrangements of the Hong Kong-Macau cross-boundary private cars is at its final stage, and both governments are studying the details and will make an announcement once they are confirmed. In addition to private cars, travelers may choose to commute by cross-boundary shuttle buses, cross-boundary coaches, or cross-boundary hire cars according to their needs. Cross-boundary shuttle buses, a frequent feeder service, will be the main mode of transport between the ports of the HZMB. The schedule is every 5 minutes during peak hours and every 10 to 20 minutes during non-peak hours. Cross-boundary coaches provide convenient transport services beyond the ports, that is within the city boundaries of the three places with fixed stopping points. Cross-boundary hire cars will travel to areas beyond the ports, providing point-to-point, personalized, and high-end cross-boundary transport services. Travelers may also get to the Hong Kong port by means of local public transport, including franchised buses, green minibuses, taxis, and non-franchised buses from different parts of Hong Kong. The Hong Kong port will also provide no less than 650 parking spaces for local private cars. Visitors who arrive at the Hong Kong port by public transport or private cars may then take cross-boundary shuttle buses to the Zhuhai port or Macau port. Lastly, the Honourable Member inquired about the number of Guangdong-Hong Kong cross-boundary private cars in the past 3 years. At present, cross-boundary private cars travelling between Guangdong-Hong Kong via road-based boundary control points must apply for a closed road permit from the Transport Department after obtaining the quotas. According to the Transport Department's figures, the number of Hong Kong cross-boundary private cars issued with valid CRPs are around 28,000, 28,600 and 30,400 in 2015, 2016, and 2017 respectively. Thank you. Mr. Wilson OR. Thank you. In the main reply of the Secretary's reply, I agree with him that the bridge will enhance the economic development connections among the cities of Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Bay Area, and facilitate the movement of people and of strategic significance for development of these places. Will he ensure that the cross-boundary vehicles will not increase the traffic pressure here? But when it comes to tackling traffic facilities, the government is moving at snail pace. DAB has given a lot of suggestions for the Secretary, but unfortunately, he has turned a deaf ear to those suggestions. Now we have 650 parking places at the Hong Kong port, and people say that this is vastly insufficient. How will you increase land to increase parking spaces, and how will you bundle this up with the development of Chung Chung together? Thank you. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. OR, for your question. Regarding our future traffic arrangements, as I said, the HZMB has got public transport interchange, and we have various forms of public transport to serve travelers, and is also linked with our railway network. Members of the public may ride on various types of public transport, including buses, GMBs, and so forth. They can also use the Sunny Bay Station and Tung Chung Station, where there will be shuttle bus services to reach the Hong Kong port. And as I said, in terms of planning, the government is actively studying the feasibility of providing parking spaces at the Hong Kong port, not just for inbound cars, but also for local residents. The three governments share a common goal, and that is to maximize the transport and economic benefits of the HZMB. So all arrangements will be convenient for the public and will promote connection and interchange among the three places. Mr. Frankie Yik. Well, according to information from the Secretary at Zhuhai and Hong Kong, we don't have any inbound car parks. But Macau is smarter. It's got more than 3,000 parking spaces for inbound visitors to stop their cars and switch to public transport. This is an excellent measure, and no quota is needed, only reservation is needed. Should we discuss with the Macau government, should our taxis be allowed to travel all the way to their inbound car park and drop off passengers there, so the Hong Kong residents can travel to Macau by means of our taxis? Thank you. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Yik, for your very innovative suggestion. Now, for Hong Kong residents, of course, they want to board in Hong Kong and arrive to the destination directly. But I think we want to ensure a positive and comfortable travel experience for the users of the bridge, and therefore we are going to regulate the cross-boundary private cars by means of a quota system. Macau has got a car park with 3,800 parking spaces, mainly for Hong Kong residents. They can apply for a closed road permit, and of course they need a permit for using the bridge and prior registration, so that they can park their cars at Hong Kong or at the Macau port. Now, if Hong Kong residents can ride taxis to our Hong Kong port and switch to a shuttle service running at 5-minute headway. We have already called tenders, and we have a contractor serving it. They are already shuttle buses colored champagne gold. So at Hong Kong port, as soon as you get off from a taxi, you can ride the shuttle service. This is already an excellent arrangement. For taxis, the capacity is still a far cry from that of buses. Well, we want to ensure green transport, and we want people to rely mainly on mass transport modes. If members are interested, you can try to drive your cars to Macau to reduce the involvement of taxis, because there is a great demand for taxis in Hong Kong and the NT and on Lantau as well. So taxis should better be reserved in Hong Kong for local use. Mr. Chung Kwok Pen. No. It is said that the quota will increase from 3,000 to 10,000 as far as Hong Kong cross-boundary private cars are concerned. I'd like to know whether the quota will be released in phases or in one go. There are 3,000 parking spaces reserved at the Macau port for Hong Kong people. There is no such park at Zhuhai because people can directly drive their cars to other part of Zhuhai. Is the government aware of the inbound licenses that will be issued by Macau and Zhuhai for traveling to Hong Kong? If we do not have enough parking spaces for them, what can we do? Thank you. the three governments have communicated on the issuance of the cross-boundary private car licenses. We have a consensus and communication is among ourselves, so we can only issue information on a quota that can be released in Hong Kong. Yes, we are discussing with Macau the number of cross-boundary vehicle licenses. We have some preliminary ideas, but we can only make an announcement after we have come to an agreement. Now, for Guangdong and Hong Kong, the quota will be increased from 3,000 to 10,000, and they are being distributed because we have spend a lot of resources in building the bridge, so we will monitor the current usage, and we don't rule out the possibility of issuing more quotas. Now, for the new quotas, the conditions are more relaxed than what it was in the past, so the three governments would want to facilitate their respective residents to enjoy the convenience of the bridge. Regarding Mr. Chung Kwok Pen's question, we will improve the current arrangement, keeping track of future developments. Ms. Alice Mak. President, the Secretary said that 10,000 licenses will be issued under the quota scheme for the Hong Kong cross-boundary private cars. I'd like to ask the administration whether this will add any pressure to the linkage roads to the Hong Kong ZMB. For instance, what will be the situation during peak hours? Will local residents be affected? And if there is traffic congestion, what are there measures to relieve the traffic jam? Thank you. At the planning stage of the HZMB, the Highways Department did an estimate of the traffic of the bridge, and then the Tuen Mun Chek Lap Kok link has been started. It will be completed in 2019, and the western part will be completed in 2010. We believe that by 2021, the North Lantau Highway will only be 0.7 when it comes to the the CV ratio. So we believe we'll be able to cope. The three governments have adopted a quota system for managing traffic because they are concerned about the capacity of the link roads, and they don't want to affect the daily lives of the local residents in these three places. When it comes to the actual operation, we will have strategic arrangements in place. Let's say there is a traffic accident, or in case of inclement weather, we will have supporting measures. We will monitor the traffic volume, and we will have monitor of the wind speed. If the wind speed has exceeded a certain limit, then the Traffic Control and Command Center of TD will activate emergency measures to ensure that the disruption to the traffic will be minimized. Mr. Yu Si-wing. Thank you, President. The Secretary said that there will be no less than 6,500 parking space, 650 parking spaces for local private cars, but there will also be coaches picking up passengers there, especially at peak hours. Coaches will wait at the Hong Kong port to pick up passengers. So in addition to parking spaces for private cars, will sufficient parking spaces be reserved for coaches to meet the huge demand? If yes, what is the number? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Siu, for your question. we cannot rely on private cars too much. So we would like to make use of public transport to enhance the usage or the traffic volume of the bridge. At the Hong Kong port, the non-franchised coaches number will also be limited. The TD would require non-franchised coaches to make a prior application and reservation to drop off passengers there. There will not be any limit on the number of such coaches. We have an online registration system for operators to make application. There were about 100 to 300 drop-off bays that will be able to meet the demand at peak time. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. So at Macau Port, there will be 3,800 parking spaces for Hong Kong private cars, and details will be announced very soon. According to media reports, there will be a quota of 50, 34 for Hong Kong and 16 for Macau for cross-boundary coaches. For cross-boundary trucks, I understand that Macau will not allow lorries to get to the urban areas. They have to operate at designated places. What is the arrangement for regulation of cross-boundary lorries? The quota arrangements, the number, and is it true that they are not allowed to access our urban areas? For cross-boundary coaches, indeed, we have agreed on quotas. And the distribution is 150 new quotas for Guangdong, Hong Kong, and also 200 for Guangdong, and also the Hong Kong HZMB, and 50 for lorries. We have to monitor the quota systems because it is a major means of transport for passenger. As for cross-boundary trucks, we understand that freight movement is also important. The Hong Kong and Macau governments, well, you might have already noticed from the media that Macau vehicles can come to Hong Kong, not vice versa. This is because we have limits in our own traffic capacity. Macau vehicles cannot directly go into our urban areas. We will ask them to be parked at a logistics center. It will be a logistics center at our airport. For Hong Kong lorries to Macau, they also have to be parked at the logistics center of Macau. So the arrangement is reciprocal. We hope that the trucking industry will find this arrangement reasonable and fair. But then the logistics centers of the two places might be at different locations. So people may have the impression that you're allowed to travel to a further area in a particular jurisdiction. But in fact, we want the arrangement to be fair. Thank you.
Question number 3, Dr. Elizabeth QUAT. Mr. President, recently there has been an appalling case in which a young child died allegedly due to abuse. Also, a female athlete has disclosed publicly that she was sexually abused by a coach when she was young. There are comments that although school social workers and teachers are in frequent contacts with children, they often overlook signs of physical or sexual abuses of children due to heavy workload and shortage of manpower. Furthermore, the existing sexual conviction record check SCRC scheme is not comprehensive and thus unable to prevent persons with previous records of sexual conviction from engaging in child-related work. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, Whether, for the purpose of early detection and prevention of child abuse cases, the government will implement the following measures. 1. Extending the existing policy under which primary and secondary schools are required to report to the Education Bureau all cases of student dropouts and departures to kindergartens and reviewing the relevant mechanisms and procedures. 2. Stepping up the training for headmasters and teachers of kindergartens and primary schools to enhance their alertness to child abuse cases. 3. Provide additional resources to extend the measure of one school social worker for each secondary school to primary schools and increasing the manpower of social workers for each school. And 4. Enhancing the case referral mechanism, including having the social welfare department proactively follow up on cases referred to it by kindergartens. And 5. Stepping up education and support for parents, such as the provision of online resources on parenting, management of emotions, etc., and the setting up of a parent counseling hotline. And 6. Stepping up publicity to call on members of the public to be more alert in the event of signs of child abuse having been noted, offer help immediately or take the initiative to report the case if it will implement of such details and implementation timetable, if not the reasons for that. 2. Whether, for the purpose of preventing persons with previous records of sexual conviction from engaging in child-related work, the government will review and improve the SCRC scheme, such as 1. Imposing a mandatory requirement for the relevant organizations and enterprises to conduct checks on all existing and prospective employees, and 2. Permitting parents hiring private tutors to conduct checks on the applicants, if so, of the details and implementation timetable, if not, the reasons for that, and 3. Of the government's measures to assist employers in drawing up codes of practice in respect of an employee's involving staying alone or physical contacts with children, providing training to such employees, and setting up a complaint mechanism so as to prevent children from being sexually abused. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. Mr. President, the government attaches great importance to the well-being of children and firmly believes that every child has the right to protection against harm and abuse, including sexual abuse. To make the cooperation amongst multidisciplinary professionals more effective, the Social Welfare Department has, in collaboration with the Labour and Welfare Bureau, Education Bureau, Department of Health, Hong Kong Police Force, the Hospital Authority, Hong Kong Council of Social Service, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and related professionals, drawn up the Procedural Guide for Handling Child Abuse Cases, revised 2015, or the Procedural Guide, for reference by different professionals and those in close contact with children because of their job, to facilitate the carrying out of the necessary preliminary assessment, investigation, multidisciplinary case conference, and follow-up of welfare plans when encountering suspected cases of child abuse. Having consulted the Education Bureau and Security Bureau, my consolidated reply to the question is as follows. 1. The key to early identification and early intervention of child abuse cases is the enhancement of awareness of the school personnel in identifying the abused children and their ability in crisis assessment and handling of the child abuse cases through multidisciplinary collaboration. If the school personnel notices wounds in a student's body or identifies a student with emotional or behavioral problems, they should report the case to the related government departments such as the SWD or EDB according to the procedural guide. On this, the EDB will strengthen related training, review the contents of relevant circular and the sections of the operational manual for pre-primary institutions to make them more concrete and precise. To uphold the right of school-aged children to universal basic education under the law, primary and secondary schools are required to report students' non-attendance to EDB on the 7th day of a student's continuous absence, so as to help non-attendant students resume schooling at the earliest opportunity. In the course of following up the non-attendance cases by EDB or the schools, if the students or their families are found to have problems and needs other than non-attendance, the cases will be referred to SWD, relevant social services agencies, and the police for provision of appropriate professional support services. As for kindergartens, EDB agrees that the follow-up arrangements for student non-attendance cases without reason or without doubt should be further enhanced. Irrespective of the number of consecutive days required for reporting students' non-attendance under the mechanism, the staff of schools should pay attention to students' condition regularly and make referral as early as possible without being subject to the number of days required for reporting cases of non-attendance, should there be any suspected cases of child abuse. EDB will maintain close communication with SWD to explore how to further enhance the case referral mechanism. EDB implements a comprehensive student guidance service where primary schools adopt a whole school approach. Teachers work in collaboration with school student guidance personnel and professional staff to provide remedial, preventive, and developmental guidance services for the establishment of a robust guidance system. Currently, there are two types of funding modes for student guidance service through the provision of manpower or grants respectively. Schools may, based on their own needs, use their funding flexibly to employ guidance personnel or procure social work service from NGOs. The government has provided a top-up student guidance service grant to public sector primary schools with 5 or more operating classes starting from 2012-13 school year. The feedback received by EDP indicates that the vast majority of primary schools could make good use of the funding to arrange for one or more school-based student guidance personnel, and currently 90% of the public sector primary schools in the territory have employed registered social workers as student guidance personnel. EDB is aware of the request in the community for one school, one social worker for primary schools. Taking into consideration the school's needs with regard to guidance service, EDB will explore the further development with LWB with an open mind and make suitable resource provision correspondingly. To raise the awareness of teachers of secondary, primary, and kindergarten levels, EDB organizes talks and seminars annually in cooperation with SWD to advise them on early identification, intervention, support of student victims of child abuse and domestic violence. Moreover, EDB has commissioned tertiary institutions to provide certificate courses on student guidance and discipline for teachers of primary and secondary schools, which cover various modules on child abuse and domestic violence, etc. Besides, starting from this week, EDB will jointly organize 4 briefings with SWD and police for teachers of all kindergartens and primary schools in the territory. The briefings will introduce how to identify and make referrals of the suspected child abuse cases so as to strengthen teachers' ability to identify the symptoms of child abuse, raise their sensitivity, as well as enhance their understanding of the handling procedures. To further enhance parent education, EDB will launch a new parent education mobile website shortly. The website enables parents to access information on supporting the physical and mental development of students. The government has also set up a task force on homeschool cooperation and parent education under the Education Commission to review the existing approach in promoting parent education and homeschool cooperation, and formulate the direction and strategy for further promoting parent education and homeschool cooperation with the objective of assisting parents to help their children grow up happily and healthily. Moreover, the 65 integrated family service centers and 2 integrated service centers operated by SWD or NGOs provide a spectrum of services to strengthen families' capability of taking care of children and to help parents improve their care capability. The 21 family life education units over the territory also deliver a package of family life education services to strengthen parent-child relationship and communication and help parents to better understand the developmental needs of their children for early identification of their children's problems so that assistance from the relevant service units may be sought when needed. Parents in need may dial the 24-hour SWD hotline to seek counseling or referral to appropriate service units. As regards public education and promotion, SWD has in recent years launched an animated short film on effective parenting and harmonious intergenerational family life, produced and launched a series APIs on television and radio and promulgated through posters and messages of combating domestic violence and seeking assistance in early and in timely manner. In 2017-18, SWD will also launch a series of APIs as well as disseminate the messages of child protection and prevention of child abuse in public transportation systems and through posters and hyperlinks to social media. Parts 2 to 3 of the question. To better protect children and mentally incapacitated persons MIPs by allowing organizations or enterprises engaging persons to undertake work relating to the above 2 kinds of persons to check whether their prospective employees have any criminal convictions records against a specified list of sexual offenses, the government implemented in 2011 the Sexual Conviction Record Check SCRC scheme through the police in accordance with the advice of the Law Reform Commission LRC. Currently, the SCRC scheme covers prospective employees and contract renewal staff applying to organizations or enterprises for work relating to children or MIPs, as well as staff assigned by outsourced service providers to other organizations or enterprises to undertake work relating to children or MIPs. These organizations include schools, residential care homes for disabled persons, private tutorial centers, and private interest or activity institutions such as swimming clubs, sports associations, and music centers. Security Bureau has from time to time reviewed the SCRC scheme and taken active steps to gradually extend its coverage. Since the 1st of April 2015, the SCRC scheme has been gradually extended to cover all eligible contract renewal staff. The Security Bureau will continue with a gradual approach when considering further extending the scope of the SCRC scheme on the basis that its handling capacity is ensured. Regarding whether it is necessary to make it mandatory for employers or staff to undertake checking, the SB considers that a balance must be struck between the two major principles of protecting children and facilitating rehabilitation. Consensus in the community will also be required. Besides, the review of Sexual Offences Subcommittee under LRC is conducting a thorough review of the laws concerning sexual offences and published 2 related consultation papers in 2012 and 2016 respectively. The review by LRC is still in progress, and when it is completed, the government will study the feasibility of introducing an all-round and legally binding checking regime, encourage discussion in the community, and seek to achieve consensus through consultation. Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Elizabeth QUAT. Mr. President, question 1 of my part 1 of my question mentions a lot of measures. According to the Secretary's reply, it seems that they are implementing all the various measures, but they are not adequate, and that leads to tragedies like the Lam Lam incident. I think it is time for the Secretary to conduct a comprehensive review to improve all the measures, especially for high-risk families. There should be early intervention and assistance. My question is in relation to part 3 of the question, that is the SCRC scheme. At the moment, there is no mandatory element of the scheme. Employers may decide whether to conduct the check. Does it mean that children deserve protection or not, because it is against the parents' wishes? Well, according to the Secretary's reply, a balance will have to be struck between the two major principles of protecting children and facilitating habilitation, and consensus will also be required. I think there is already a consensus in the community, that is, we must protect children against abuse. There are different ways to help rehabilitants, but children do not have any option. So shouldn't we give priority to the principle of protecting children instead of the interests of adults? The community should accord priority to protecting children. Is that right, Secretary? I think the government's policy and the community's consensus is consistent. We, of course, accord priority to protecting children. In the main reply, however, we also mentioned that the Law Reform Commission is conducting a thorough review of the relevant matters. And based on the work of the LRC, we will explore how we should improve the existing mechanism and the measures. Mr. Ip Kin Yuen. Mr. President, well, I think we are disheartened by tragedies such as the Lam Lam incident. I think one way to deal with the matter is, of course, to improve the reporting mechanism. The administration's reply has pointed out that regardless of the reporting requirements or notification requirement, school personnel should keep children's condition under close monitoring and make referral as early as possible if required. And according to the subcommittee's papers, the first teacher or school personnel in contact with a child subject to abuse should notify the relevant bureau or department. So I think the responsibility is very clear. Yet it also suggests that the school council and the school principal should also be notified. I received requests for assistance from teachers that sometimes school principals and the school council may not agree that cases should be referred. Under such circumstances, when the teacher believes firmly that it is a case of child abuse, what should they do? Well, Mr. Ip Kin Yuen, Can you just put your question? Coming to that soon. Should they follow the decision of their superior? Because otherwise they will not be able to notify the relevant authorities, and they find it disturbing. In such circumstances, my question is whether clear guidance will be given to the roles of school principals and council members. And for teaching staff, should they encounter such a problem, what guidance will be provided by the administration as to what they should do? Should they follow the superior's order, or should they go ahead and make a notification? Secretary. Mr. President, regarding the Education Bureau's reply in terms of the guidance, the key is, first of all, the first teaching staff in contact with the child suspected of child abuse should provide support and discuss with the school on the follow-up action to be taken. Assuming that all parties, be it teacher, school council members or school principals, do not have the interests of the child in mind, we will then have to take a lot of preventive measures. I think it's for the sector to discuss whether we should place trust in professionals in the sector and the degree of trust. Under the existing mechanism, we do allow discussions. We should not assume that these personnel would be defensive and hesitant in putting the child's interest first. We understand that there will always be irregularities. So the member asked about the teaching staff being the person first in contact with the victim. It's very difficult to answer this question, Madam Deputy, because we need to consider whether there are provisions in the teacher's code of conduct to guide the teacher in handling such a situation. If it's in the situation of a social worker, however, I can say clearly that the social worker's guidelines require him to make notification. Dr. Fernando Zhang, in the Lam Lam tragedy, we learn from media coverage that kindergarten teachers already noticed that something was wrong. Notification was made to the school, to the headmaster, but no action was taken. And for Lam Lam's brother, notification was made to the SWD, but it's still there is still a question mark on whether referral was ultimately made. Well, the key to handling such tragedies is, of course, to support the teacher, support the parents, and make notifications. However, for the school personnel coming across such cases, how should notification be made, and where should the responsibility lie? There should be clear guidelines. I therefore suggest that we explore the idea of a mandatory notification mechanism. In fact, the UN committee already suggested Hong Kong taking this approach back in 2013. But now Secretary's reply to Mr. Ip Kin Yun's question is that negotiation is still possible, and the teacher should discuss with the school and the school principal first. But if the child's life is at stake, why should we allow discussion? In terms of a mandatory notification mechanism, Secretary already said in public that he keeps an open mind and he would explore this idea. So how to go about it? Have you set up an interdepartmental task force to explore this issue? Do you have a roadmap or timetable for that? Secretary, regarding the members' questions, as he mentioned, I did say in public that we do keep all options open in the proposal to establish the mandatory notification mechanism. In fact, during the discussion at the panel on social welfare services, I also heard from deputations divergent views. We do not have any specific plan to implement a mandatory notification mechanism. As such, I can only say that we'll consider whether an appropriate review of the law would be undertaken for this purpose. But we have not started the preparation work. Dr. Fernando Zhang, he hasn't answered your question. I asked a timetable and roadmap. Well, you want elucidation? It's clear. Please be seated. Secretary, anything to add? Madam Deputy, my reply is that we'll do it as soon as possible. Dr. Pierre Chan, Madam Deputy, child abuse and sexual abuse. Well, doctors and nurses, without taking extra resources, have been taking care of children. And we have also made up for the inadequacies of the LWD, Education Bureau, and the Security Bureau. Because very many of the suspected child abuse cases would be referred to the A&E ward and also the children's ward. And the case conference for professionals to protect children against child abuse will have to be convened in 10 days' time. These children may not be suffering from any ailment, but they may be required to stay in the ward to wait for the government's arrangement. My question is this: whether there will be dedicated funding for the multidisciplinary professional case conference to protect children against child abuse, comprising more than 10 professionals from different departments. If so, when will it be set up? If not, the reasons for that. Secretary, after this unfortunate incident, indeed, the Education Bureau and the Labour and Welfare Bureau have already begun a review, and we also explore how resources could be provided. I understand for the professional case, multidisciplinary case conference, members attending the conference come from different government departments. And I also am concerned about the workload of the Child Protection Unit of the Social Welfare Department, and increase of manpower may be necessary. I also need to explore the issue with other government departments on this. I cannot give you a specific answer on what we can do.
Question 4, Mr. Paul TSE. Thank you, Madam Deputy. The Buildings Department BD has adopted a zero-tolerance approach for unauthorized building works (UBWs) in recent years. In all districts such as Kwun Tong, Wong Tai Sin, Ngau Tau Kok, San Po Kong, and Lei Yu Mun, a large number of commercial and residential buildings are suspected of having UBWs, with numerous instances of BD issuing removal orders. For example, BD has issued removal orders in respect of the unauthorized rooftop structures in a number of buildings located on Yuhua Street in Kwun Tong, in which many elderly property owners have lived for the past few decades. Also, BD has ordered owners of some seafood restaurants in Lei Yu Mun to remove the UBWs there, which were erected for protection against typhoons and waves and for showcasing the fishing village characters, thus reverting to the original primitive squatter structures. On the contrary, when she attended this Council's question and answer session earlier this month, the Chief Executive called on the various sectors of the community to be tolerant towards UBWs found in the residence of newly appointed Secretary for Justice. Some media have described this approach of handling this incident as do as I say, not as I do for senior government officials. The CE has also pointed out that the policy for handling UBWs had changed continuously in the past decade, and that the authorities treated UBWs involving government officials and members of the public under the principle of equal footing and fairness. In this connection, will the government inform this Council, 1, whether it has assessed if there is any difference in terms of the attitude and practices adopted when CE and relevant government departments dealt with UBWs found in residences of former CE and senior government officials, and the cases of alleged UBWs in the properties of members of the public, in particular the authorized rooftop structures on Yuhua Street. 2, whether it has assessed if members of the public and shop operators could, on grounds of insufficient alertness sensitivity, request the authorities to review afresh their cases. If it has, of the outcome, if not the reasons for that, and 3, whether BD will, in response to CE's calling on the adoption of a tolerant attitude in dealing with UBW issues involving SJ's residents, as it has reported that it would take 100 years for the department to complete handling of these cases, which have accumulated to over 800,000, review and revise the relevant policy, if so, of the details, if not, reasons for that. Secretary for Development. Mr. President, I thank Mr. Dare for the question. The government has always attached great importance to building safety of Hong Kong. When formulating and implementing policy in dealing with UBWs, the government has always put building safety first and will adopt a pragmatic approach to handle the matter impartially according to the priority and category of the UBWs concerned. The Building Authority, that is, Director of Buildings, is responsible for taking enforcement actions against UBWs in accordance with the Buildings Ordinance, BO, Cap 123. We have formulated a clear enforcement policy against UBWs. The BD has been handling UBWs cases in accordance with the BO and the enforcement policy under the principles of acting in accordance with the law and impartiality. The BD has adopted a risk-based approach in determining the priority of enforcement actions against UBWs and targeted the actionable UBWs for actions. According to the enforcement policy adopted in April 2001, actionable UBWs include 7 categories. They are 1. UBWs constituting obvious hazard or imminent danger to life or property. 2. Those newly constructed or under construction. 3. Those constituting serious hazards or serious environmental nuisances. 4. Major individual items. 5. Items in individual buildings with expensive UBWs. 6. UBWs in buildings targeted for large-scale operations. And 7. Those in environmentally friendly features granted with gross floor area concessions. To strengthen enforcement against UBWs, we extended the coverage of actionable UBWs to include all UBWs in rooftops, podiums, yards, and backlanes of buildings in April 2011. The expanded scope of actionable UBWs has been adopted until now. The BD takes enforcement actions against actionable UBWs. Specifically, unless the owner proactively handles the relevant UBWs, say by appointing an authorized person AP to submit rectification proposals, the department will issue a removal order requiring the owner concerned to carry out works to remove the UBWs within a specific period of time and register the removal order in the land registry. If the owner does not rectify the situation within the period of time specified in the removal order without reasonable excuse, the department will consider instigating prosecution actions and may arrange government contractor to carry out necessary removal or rectification works and recover the cost of work supervision, charge, and surcharge from the defaulted owners. Regarding non-actionable UBWs, the department will, depending on the situation, serve advisory letters or warning notices requesting the owner to remove the UBWs voluntarily. If the owner fails to remove these structures in the warning notice by the date specified, BD will send the warning notice to the land registry and register it in the title records of the premises. The warning notice will only be written off upon removal of the UBWs by the owner. The policy and stance all along adopted by the BD in its enforcement against UBWs is to require the owner to rectify the irregularities as soon as practicable. Under normal circumstances, the BD will not initiate criminal investigation into whether there has been contravention of the BO. However, if there is information showing that the registered persons under the BO are suspected to be involved in the erection of these structures, or that the registered persons knowingly submit misrepresented documents to the department, the BD will duly follow up the case, including initiating criminal investigation. In consultation with BD, my reply to the 3 parts of the question is as follows. First, in handling matters relating to UBWs, The BD has been following the principles of acting in accordance with the law and impartiality and takes appropriate actions according to the BO and prevailing enforcement policy. In accordance with the established practice adopted since mid-2011, if owners involved in these cases under media inquiry and reports are senior government officials or community celebrities, the BD will accord priority in carrying out site inspection with a view to investigating if these structures in fact exist so as to clear any public concern as soon as practicable. If any UBWs are identified in the site inspection, BD will take appropriate actions in accordance with the ordinance and the prevailing enforcement policy in an impartial manner and will not adopt different standards because of the identity of those involved. We must reiterate that BD colleagues have all along been upholding their professionalism and independence and taking appropriate actions in accordance with BO and the prevailing enforcement policy. 2 and 3. The prevailing enforcement policy against UBWs has been put in place since April 2011. In view of the sheer amount of UBWs, the relevant policy has always upheld the risk-based principle and suitably accord enforcement priorities. As mentioned in part 1 of my reply, in handling every case, the BD has been taking appropriate enforcement and follow-up actions in accordance with the BO and prevailing enforcement policy against UBWs impartially. If actionable UBWs under the prevailing enforcement policy are identified upon site inspection, irrespective of whether the owner is aware of the existence of the structure in the premises, the BD will issue a removal order to the owner requiring removal of the structure within a specified period of time, unless the owner concerned proactively deals with the relevant structure, say by appointing an AP to submit rectification proposals. In the past 3 years, that is from 2015 to 2017, on average, about 13,000 removal orders have been issued and about 26,000 UBWs were removed annually. We must be cautious in making major changes to the existing UBW's enforcement policy, lest that it would cause confusion to the public and even convey a wrong message to the community that the government lacks determination to combat these structures. The government has no plan at this stage to introduce any major change to existing enforcement policy. The BD will continue to take a multi-pronged approach to tackle the problem of UBWs. Apart from existing measures including prosecution, imposing surcharge on default works, implementing validation and financial assistance schemes, and providing support through social service teams, the BD will explore other effective means to encourage owners to remove their UBWs. The BD will also endeavor to raise its efficiency and reprioritize its work as necessary, such as adjusting the number of target buildings under large-scale operations or focusing its resources on conducting these operations against buildings subject to higher risk caused by UBWs. Thank you. Mr. Paul TSE. Mr. President, well, there has been a number of years since Hong Kong has the high land price policy. As a result, land resources is very valuable and expensive. Hong Kong ranks first when it comes to price level. Well, from 2007, there was risk-based, and 2011, there was a change to actionable UBWs on the rooftops, podium, and yachts. In a recent audit report, there are about 28,000 buildings involved with tens of thousands of UBWs. Annually, well, there was a drop from 45,000 to 17,000 UBWs and then another increase recently to 26,000. We can understand when there are high risks. However, when it comes to old districts with very low risk and these UBWs have existed for a number of years, why can't they be tolerated, as said by the Chief Executive? People save all their life so that they can have a roof over their head. They are just small owners. They are very different from senior government officials buying luxurious flats, and they know how to evade taxes. Well, who deserves more tolerance? I thank Mr. Jeff for the question. When it comes to enforcement policy of UBWs, you see that there has been an involvement in the past few years. Prior to 2011, well, in 2010, as I said, that there were about 800,000 UBWs, and there were large-scale operations. Most of these UBWs were cages, metal cages inside flats, and these cages pose fire hazards and problems to building structures. And to 2011, after 10 years of work, about 400,000 of them have been removed. So it's not the case that government efforts have gone to waste. Basically, these metal cages have been dealt with. And at that time, there was pressure from society that government needed to do more. There was unfairness perceived. Say, for example, well, if when it comes to usable area, well, you have, when with UBWs, you have additional area to use. So we have put in some changes. UBW is in rooftops, podiums, yards, back lanes. They are not easily seen from the outside. So it poses enforcement difficulties. As Mr. Tse pointed out, that the number has dropped at one point to 13,000, but in recent years it has increased to 26,000 or so. However, you see that our work has been effective. In 2014, once we have issued removal orders, and at that time there were about 68,000 that have been not being complied with. At the end of 2017, it has dropped to about 55,000. So you see that the backlog has somewhat eased. And as to whether our policy will change, as I said in my main reply, once we have formulated a policy, it's a result of discussion in society and consensus. Back in 2015, there was an audit report, and there were hearings in the PAC in LegCo, and there were expectations that enforcement action should be strengthened. And we don't have any plans to change our enforcement policy. But of course, we'll listen to valuable views from members. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. In the Secretary's reply, he has been emphasizing that when it comes to dealing with UBWs, they do it with impartiality. That is the standard when it comes to enforcement actions. At one point, Mrs. Carrie Lam was the Secretary for Development. In dealing with the UBW of Henry Tang, she said that you can't just buy your way out when it comes to UBW. You have to be impartial so that there can be deterrence effect. However, when it comes to Henry Tang's case, there were criminal investigations taken by the BD, there were prosecution, and in the end, Mrs. Tang was penalized. However, when it comes to UBWs of Teresa Zhang, the Secretary, I don't see any information that the BD will conduct any investigation, similar criminal investigation. And don't forget, well, the unit occupied by the spouse of the Secretary also contains UBWs. So when it comes to this impartiality on the part of the BD, we see that it doesn't apply in the case of Teresa Zhang. Is that the case? Secretary, I thank Mr. Wu's question. And indeed, the BD has all along adopted the principle of impartiality. For cases involving senior government officials, well, after 2011, we have adjusted the policy to accord priority to these cases. The policy, the law, and the legal basis are no different from other cases. Mr. Wu mentioned about criminal prosecution. Previously, there were some. And as I said in my main reply, under normal circumstances, the BD would not follow up by criminal investigation because the focus is to remove the UBW, to restore building safety, and to take away the nuisance. If criminal investigation is initiated, then there needs to be careful collection of evidence, and there is an extra burden. Between 2009 and 2017, there were 27 criminal prosecutions. And whether there would be criminal prosecution, it depends on the evidence collected. I can't give you a legal advice here, so I'm speaking in general terms. If there are legal advice saying that if it is fully known that you need an approval from the building authority and fail to do so, and if there is evidence showing that the BD will submit the evidence to the Department of Justice, upon consideration, the DOJ will decide whether to initiate prosecution. The number of prosecutions may be low, but there are prosecutions. And in terms of cases being followed up by the BD, you must understand that I can't comment on those. Mr. Jonas Ho. Sorry, speakers off mic. I think the Secretary has answered you in detail. Mr. Ho. Thank you, Mr. President. I heard from the Secretary that UBW situation is very serious. It's a common phenomenon in our society. Apart from initiating prosecution on 7 categories with higher risk, are there any other more active ways to deal with the problem? Say, for example, 19 measures applied to small houses in the new territories. It encouraged people to act in accordance with the law, and similar arrangements have been applied to structures in the urban area, amounting to over 200 or so measures. Are there any measures to enable people to make an early application so that they will not inadvertently break the law? Secretary, as I said, current enforcement policy is a result of discussion and consideration. And we don't have any plan to tighten or relax existing policy. When it comes to individual cases, say for example the ones cited by Mr. Ho, if you have recommendations or proposals, we're happy to listen to them. Mr. Leung Chi-kwong. Mr. President, the problem of UBWs has caused grievances in society. I have dealt with in the district cases requesting assistance, a large number of them. The Lands Department, District Lands Office, or the Buildings Department have all acted in accordance with the law. And they have not used any leeways. I do hope that the BD will, or relevant government departments will continue to act along this spirit. But there are areas that need improvement. I'd like to ask the Secretary, if the law is broken, is it really the case that everyone is equal before the law? I have heard that there is an incumbent legislator whose home has illegal structures. However, the Lands Department said that the law is not broken. However, the BD said that it is. So what is the appropriate way to deal with it? Secretary, I thank Mr. Chow for the question. As you said, you talk about having no leeway, and my word is impartiality, and we act in accordance with the law. Of course, different departments may have a different legal basis. Say, for this department, they rely on this chapter. For another department, it's a different chapter. That's understandable. But when it comes to the Lands Department or the BD, I believe, I have faith that they will act in accordance with the law. If it is a UBW, then it is. If it is not, then it's not. It's nothing to do with this, the capacity of the person, say whether it is whether the person is a legislator.
Question 5, Mr. Charles Peter MOK. President, It was reported in the press on the 6th of this month, the day on which the Secretary for Justice SJ took office, that there were a number of unauthorized building works UBWs contravening the buildings ordinance in SJ's residence, which she owned through a company. SJ subsequently stated that an unauthorized person appointed by her and personnel of the Buildings Department had, after verification, confirmed the matter. Some members of the public have expressed concern about the integrity and conduct of principal officials and whether there were errors or omissions in the integrity checking conducted on candidates for principal official posts, resulting in the failure to uncover the UBWs in SJ's residence. In this connection, would the government inform this council, 1. How the government ensures that criminal investigations and legal proceedings, if any, relating to the UBWs in SJ's residence are conducted impartially. 2. Whether the existing code for officials under the political appointment system has provided that punishments may be imposed on those principal officials found to have made false statements or misleading omissions in the process of integrity checking, if so, of the details, if not the reasons for that. And 3. As UBWs have been uncovered in recent years in the residences of a number of principal officials, whether the government has reviewed if there are any inadequacies in the integrity checking conducted on candidates for principal official posts. If it has reviewed of the outcome, whether improvements were made, such as requiring the candidates concerned to submit certifications issued by authorized persons that no UBWs are found in the properties in which the candidates have beneficial interests. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. President, with regard to Mr. Charles Mok's question, after consulting the relevant officers in Bureau, I am providing a consolidated reply as follows. 1. The Building Authority, that is the Director of Buildings, is responsible for taking enforcement actions in accordance with the Buildings Ordinance, BO. In handling matters relating to unauthorized building works, UBWs, the Buildings Department, BD, has been following the principles of acting in accordance with the law and impartiality and takes appropriate actions pursuant to the BO and the prevailing enforcement policy. In accordance with the established practice adopted since mid-2011, if the owners involved in the UBW's cases under media inquiry or report are senior government officials or community celebrities, BD will accord priority in carrying out site inspection with a view to investigating if the UBWs in fact exist so as to clear any public concerns as soon as practicable. If any UBWs are identified in the site inspection, BD will take appropriate actions in accordance with BO and the prevailing enforcement policy in an impartial manner and will not adopt different enforcement standards because of the identity of those who are involved. As at the 17th of January, the police have separately received reports from 2 individuals requesting the police's investigation based on their knowledge from the newspaper and public information that there were suspected illegal structures in the public officers' property and no reference to the relevant information was made in applying to the bank for mortgage. The cases classified as requests for a police investigation are followed up by the Wan Chai Police District. The police, in respect of each case, will conduct fair and impartial investigation regardless of the background of the person involved. If there is reasonable suspicion of any contravention of law, the police will carry out enforcement according to the law. Politically appointed officials, PAOs, must ensure that no actual or potential conflict arises between their public duties and their private interests and should refrain from handling cases with actual or potential conflict of interest. In order to avoid possible perception of bias, partiality, or improper influence, the Secretary of Justice has delegated to the Law Officer of Civil Law the authority to handle all civil matters relating to alleged suspected unauthorized or legal structures of her property at Tai Lam, Tuen Mun, including advising the government bureau and departments concerned and representing the same in the conduct of any civil proceedings. Based on the same considerations, the Secretary for Justice has also delegated to the Director of Public Prosecutions the authority to handle all prosecutorial matters relating to such matters, including should it become necessary to do so, the decision as to whether any prosecution action should be commenced against any persons involved in the matter. The Secretary of Justice will not participate in any relevant decisions or legal proceedings regarding such matters. 2. The Code for Officials under the Political Appointment System, the Code, states that PAOs shall abide by the law and observe the highest standards of personal conduct and integrity at all times. They shall also ensure that no actual or potential conflict arises between their public duties and their private interests. While the Code provides rules and principles for appropriate conduct under certain circumstances, it is difficult for the Code to specify every type of act or behavior expected of PAOs. Where the circumstances have not been prescribed, it is the responsibility of PAOs to make judgments in accordance with the principles set out in the Code on how best to act in order to uphold the higher standards, and they shall act in the best interests of the Hong Kong SAR as a whole. 3. All PAOs are required to undergo extended checking before appointment. The procedures are largely the same as those adopted for extended checking in the civil service. The Hong Kong Police Force is responsible for conducting the checking, including conducting interviews with the subject, his or her referees and supervisors, as well as inspecting relevant records, etc. In order to maintain the effectiveness and integrity of the extended checking system, it is necessary to keep the specific arrangements and the related details of the system strictly confidential. Thank you, President. Mr. Charles Peter MOK. If the SG would come to answer all three questions, would be the best. But so now we have to ask the SCMA of questions, because people of Hong Kong just don't get it how the extended checking turned out to be like this. Now, you said you want to maintain the effectiveness and integrity of the extended system, so it is necessary to keep the specific arrangements and the details strictly confidential. So you're saying that this council has no power to monitor the system. What you should have said, rather, is to maintain public confidence in the integrities in the extended checking system, the specific details should be made public. You should have said so in your reply. Now, people in the community and members simply don't get it why questions about UBWs were not asked in the extended checking, and how come there was no active investigation on the properties. You just use Google search, for instance, but then you said that under the code it says that officials may make judgments in accordance with principles set out in the code and decide how best to act in order to uphold the high standards. So you simply pass the buck to the person under checking. So that person under checking has so much powers. Now for this SJ case, obviously we're not just talking about UBWs. We're talking about the whole application procedure, and it's a matter of integrity. So in the course of extended checking, was it the case that someone did not declare anything, or the government did not investigate into or check in anything? So that's why the chief executive and us are all just waiting for Theresa Jiang to come up with a little bit more information every day. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. MOK, for the question. Mr. MOK's question covers 2 points. One, for politically appointed officials. Now, when the government considers whether to appoint someone as a PAO, under the current system, there will be an extended checking before the appointment. This is to check whether the person is suitable for the post. Now, for extended checking, it is built upon the trust and cooperation of all parties involved, in particular the parties under checking. So I hope you could appreciate that the specific arrangement and related details of the system have to be kept confidential, so I'm not at liberty to divulge any information here. And second point, now when PAOs perform their duties, now, there is a code for officials under the political appointment system to be followed. when PAOs perform the duties, the code is to ensure that there is no conflict between, or where there is conflict between public duties and private interests, how the cases should be handled. So some principles and guidelines are included in the code. Of course, it is not possible to be exhaustive in all for all circumstances, but there is a standard of complying with a principle of complying with code. So PAOs should make their own judgments, and when necessary, reports should be made to the chief executive, and the chief executive would record such reports. Which part of the question of the answer? I see the case that the CE is also saying same as us, that she's only getting bits and drips and drabs of information every day, or was she aware of that beforehand? Secretary? The SJ has given explanations on the circumstances, so I have nothing to add to that. Mr. Dennis Kwok. In the main reply, Secretary, you said that for every principally appointed officials, the official, he or she has to undergo extended checking. So you could just ask a simple question, do you or do you not have UBWs? If they answer yes and you ignore it, then that's cover up. If the person said there's no UBW, but eventually it's found that he or she does have UBWs, that means he or she is covering up and she's making a misrepresentation to the chief executive. So if that's the case, how would the CE penalize the person, or would there be any penalty at all? Because during extended checking, the person has not given full details on the illegal structures. So how will the CE deal with the case of non-reporting or non-declaration in this case? Secretary, thank you for the question, Mr. Kwok. Now, Mr. Kwok referred to some assumptions in relation to the case. Now, it is inappropriate for us to comment on individual cases. And under the extended checking system, there is a procedure to follow. For example, requiring the person under checking to provide certain information, there will be an interview. There are referees, consultation with referees and supervisors. So through these various arrangements, then we form an assessment, and this task is undertaken by the police. If necessary, other law enforcement agencies may be approached for information. On the specific arrangements of the extended checking, or what questions will be asked or not asked, we could not go into a discussion on that, I'm afraid. It is important that we keep the system confidential for the effectiveness of the system, because the system is based on trust and cooperation. Mr. Kwok, which part of your question has not been answered? If someone has not divulged the truth, what would be the consequences, or would there be any consequences? Secretary, now in the code for officials under the political appointment system, there are provisions to on prevention of conflict of interest, so there are principles to go by on dealing with conflict of interest. And also for politically appointed officials, if they're suspected to have breached their duties or the provisions in the code, the CE will go by established procedures to determine if the allegation is true and then decide what to do as a result. Ms. Starry Lee. Now, SJ's UBW fiasco has become a political bomb, and this bomb keeps exploding since she assumed office. So this has done much damage to the SJ and the SAL government. But how much harm has it been done? Well, we don't know yet. It is really sad to see this happen. until a lot of issues do beg a lot of questions. First of all, we don't get it. How come the SJ did not check her properties before she assumed post? Miss Dari Lee, please. And second point is, how come the extended checking has not been able to reveal these UBWs? So you said you have a stringent extended checking system on PAOs. Their inadequacies. Now, UBWs have been a political killer for many. Many's political life has come to an abrupt end because of UBWs. Now, the extended checking was unable to reveal the UBWs of the SJ's properties. So, are you going to review the extended checking system? Do you agree that there have been omissions in the system, and that's why the CE and the SJ have to face this bomb today? Secretary. Thank you, President. Thank you, Ms. Lee, for your questions. As I said, extended checking is performed before the appointment of PAOs. For the arrangements and the operation of the extended checking, they are the same as that for extended checking in the civil service. So when civil servants need to assume certain posts, they will have to undergo extended checking. The system is more or less the same. The system has been working well. That's a fact. Now, after certain circumstances unfold, or we'll see how we could draw experience in relation to the specific arrangements and details, and then we'll review the system as necessary. I'm sure the government will do that. Mr. Elvin or Ms. Dari Lee, which part of your question has not been answered? The Secretary has not said whether you have already started a review after this case, or will you review it? Secretary, on the extended checking system, it is operated by the Hong Kong Police Force. For extended checking of civil servants, the Civil Service Bureau is responsible. Now, for POs, the Chief Executive's Office is in charge of the extended checking. So, as I said, if for any systems, we will always learn from experience and review the situation to see where there is room for improvement. Thank you. Mr. Elvin Young. Thank you, President. In the Secretary's reply, he said that in dealing with extended checking, it is based on the cooperation and trust of the person under checking. But now something has gone wrong. Does it mean that someone cannot be trusted or someone has not been cooperative? Now, there is this gaping loophole in the extended checking system. Would you go back to the SL government? Will you then improve upon the extended checking system, or you may consider revealing some important parts of the system for our information so we could monitor the government in this respect? Would you do that? Secretary, thank you for your questions, Mr. Young. Now, for a particular case, it is not appropriate for us to comment or discuss the relevant details. And then, and it's also not appropriate, therefore, to make any assumptions or draw any conclusions arising from the case. Now, in the extended checking system, certain procedures followed. Information will be sought and records will be checked. So there is a procedure and a process to follow to make sure that the revenue checking is done as required. Now, the system requires the cooperation and the trust of the parties involved. It is not just about the person under checking. It's also about persons operating the system. So this is a fact. So now, as I'm not able to discuss the details, or we haven't got the full information, so it's inappropriate for us to jump to a certain conclusion. It's like when we do a body check, it's for us to find out if we have any ailments. But but we do a body check just not necessarily because we are sick. So with the extended vetting checking system, with all these procedures and processes in place, this system is on the whole reliable. But of course, if we identify any problems, or we can draw any experience from any cases, then of course we review the system to see whether there's room for further improvement. Now, we certainly do that, but it has to be based on the information we have, and before we make any judgment or follow-up action, or take follow-up actions. Thank you. Mr. Jeremy Tam. President, for the extended checking, shouldn't it cover UBWs? It was asked before. Now, at this council on the 11th of July 2012, Mr. James O asked an oral question about the former Chief Executive's C.Y. Leung's UBWs. He asked the same question, whether you would include a question on UBWs in the extended checking system. So you can't say you only learned about this problem now, because in 2012 you were asked once already about it. And then in 2012, already at this council, this question was raised and the administration gave a reply. So in extended checking, is there a question or not on whether there are UBWs? So it's a question whether you ask a question. It doesn't involve anyone's privacy or confidentiality. And my question is simply that whether there is a question on UBWs. Mr. Ray Chen, call for quorum. Mr. Ray Chen, please do not shout in the chamber.
局長。
Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Tam, for your question. My apology, and I ask for your understanding, Mr. Tam. To ensure the effectiveness of the extended checking system, the case information, of course, cannot be divulged. As for the specific arrangements, including the questions that may be asked and other details, these have to be kept confidential as well. But of course, for any system, we'll have regard to experience and we'll review the operation of the extended checking system. Thank you. Mr. Tam, which part of the question has not been answered? This is not a debate. No, I'm not debating the issue. Which part of the question has not been answered? I asked whether there is this item in the extended checking. I'm not asking about your the details of confirmation. The question has been answered, actually.
Okay. Last question seeking an oral reply. Mr. Kenneth LEUNG. First of all, I'd like to welcome Secretary of Justice, Mr. Kenneth LEUNG. Please raise your question. I'm getting to that. The Secretary for Justice, or SJ, is a principal official under the political appointment system of the Hong Kong SAR government. The functions of SJ include controlling law drafting and criminal prosecutions, soliciting support from this council and the public for government policies and proposals, etc. In this connection, will the government inform this council, one, of the respective mechanisms currently in place for ensuring that the work of the Department of Justice relating to criminal prosecutions is free from any interference, and for handling any conflicts of roles arising between the exercise of criminal prosecution function by SJ and her exercise of other functions or her personal affairs. 2. Of the number of times in each of the past 5 years for which the exercise of a function of SJ was transferred to the Solicitor General, the Director of Public Prosecutions, or other law officers of DOJ in order to avoid any perceived or real role conflicts, among them the number of times for which the work relating to criminal prosecutions was involved. And 3. Given that the Special Committee on Constitutional Affairs and Human Rights of the Hong Kong Bar Association and a former Executive Council member both proposed earlier that SJ shall vest all decisions relating to criminal prosecutions in the Director of Public Prosecutions to be made independently and free from any interference, to avoid the public perception that certain criminal prosecution decisions might be affected by SJ's exercise of other functions, whether the government will consider that proposal, if not, of the justifications for that. Secretary for Justice. President. The maintenance of public support and confidence in the criminal justice system is crucial for upholding the rule of law. To achieve this, it is important that prosecutorial independence should be ensured. In this regard, it is enshrined under Article 63 of the Basic Law that the Department of Justice of the Hong Kong SAR shall control criminal prosecutions free from any interference. As head of DOJ, the Secretary for Justice has a constitutional duty and responsibility to make decisions and supervise conduct of criminal prosecutions. Decisions to prosecute or not, as the case may be, must be based on an objective and professional assessment of the available evidence and the law and be in accordance with the published prosecution code. The prosecution will consider whether there is enough evidence to prosecute, and the test is whether the evidence is sufficient to demonstrate a reasonable prospect of conviction. If there is sufficient evidence to prosecute, the prosecution will then consider whether it is in the public interest to do so. The legal discussions within DOJ are always conducted with professionalism, free from political considerations, and most importantly, in confidence. Some decisions are hard to make, but DOJ is duty-bound to make decisions that are legally correct and free from any interference, difficult or unpalatable, though they may be. In respect of the three parts of the Honourable Kenneth Leung's question on how to ensure the independence of the work of the DOJ relating to criminal prosecution, the consolidated response of DOJ is as follows. There are appropriate checks and accountability mechanisms in place to ensure free and independent control of prosecutions in Hong Kong. In general, in circumstances where there is any actual or potential conflict of interest on his or her part, the SJ, after satisfying himself or herself that the Director of Public Prosecutions, or DPP, has no connection with any of the persons or events concerned, will delegate to the DPP the authority to handle the matter, including the consideration of and decision as to whether any prosecution action is warranted. Moreover, should it transpire subsequently that the handling of such legal proceedings or prosecutorial matters may give rise to any conflicts of interest, actual or potential, on the part of the legal officers who had been so delegated, the delegation given will be reviewed. Depending upon the facts of each individual case, independent advice from outside counsel may also be sought. This practice has been consistently applied. In the number of cases in recent years where there was such delegation or a withdrawal of such delegation, the administration would, as appropriate in the circumstances of the case, issue statements as to the arrangement at appropriate juncture. According to our records, in the 5-year period from 2013 to 2017, the number of occasions on which the former SJ delegated the exercise of certain functions to other legal officers within DOJ regarding cases with actual or potential conflicts of interest are 10 times, 11 times, 4 times, 5 times, and 9 times respectively. Apart from one occasion each in 2013, 2015, and 2016, and 2 occasions in 2017 involving civil proceedings or other delegations related to criminal prosecution work. The above-mentioned system has worked well in the past and will continue to do so. The making of prosecutorial decisions is governed by the Prosecution Code, free from influence from any actual or potential conflict of interest. And where charges are laid, the cases are considered by the courts. DOJ would continue to review and enhance the declaration and delegation systems in DOJ in respect of actual or potential conflicts of interest. Notwithstanding the above, we are aware that there are suggestions that the SJ should delegate all prosecutorial decisions to the DPP so as to ensure the independence of such decisions. As I've pointed out just now, decisions to prosecute or not, as the case may be, must be based on an objective and professional assessment of the available evidence and the law and be in accordance with the published prosecution code. In making the decisions, it must be free from any political considerations. Currently, the independence of prosecutorial decisions is sufficiently safeguarded by Article 63 of the Basic Law. Currently, no review has been conducted, nor is there any timetable on the issue of SJ vesting all decisions relating to criminal prosecutions in the DPP. However, DOJ is willing to listen to views that this Council, the legal professional bodies, and the public may have. Any future consideration of the matter will be subject to the key principles set up above. In any event, all colleagues within DOJ, including the DPP, officers of the Prosecutions Division, and myself, will remain conscious of the importance of prosecutorial independence, a cardinal principle that is stressed in the Prosecution Code. All prosecutorial decisions will continue to be made independently without political or other improper or undue influence. Thank you, President. Mr. Kenneth Leung. President, I'm disappointed with the SJ's response, especially in paragraph 4. The SJ said he would look at the circumstances of each case before deciding whether delegations would be made. If a case involves an EXCO member or the Secretary of Justice herself, if a case involves multiple properties, would decision have to be made every single time? Under the delegation system, if the persons involved are public officers or EXCO members, it must be there must be a standing order instead of looking at the circumstances of each case. Secretary of Justice, when dealing with different cases, a delegation system is in place. When there is actual or potential conflicts of interest, a delegation system can ensure that the SJ would not be involved in the case, whether criminal or civil, or when litigations are to be made. So a system would apply to these circumstances, and as explained in my reply, for each case, the DOJ would make certain decisions, and for delegations that are in place but not yet applicable, a statement would be made by the DOJ. Please point out the part of your question which was not answered. If the person involved is the SJ, why isn't there a standing order where no delegation is necessary? Please sit down. SJ, would you like to supplement? If my own properties are involved, as I explained earlier, I already explained the law officer, civil law, and the director of public prosecutions to deal with matters relating to my properties. Mr. Leung asked whether there is a standard mechanism in place so that a firewall is warranted for all cases involving the SJ. This is something we can think about, but our practice is to deal with the cases according to the circumstances. As we said, we will continue to streamline and review our mechanism. Mr. Roy Kwong. President, SJ, news reports today showed what your basement looked like. There's a wine cellar, there's a band room, and a private cinema. And information was released bit by bit in recent days, and there are unauthorized works in your mansion and properties. And please state your question, Mr. Roy Kwong. President, and after information was released bit by bit, you have failed to address the public of the incident. You have virtually zero credibility, and you have become a liability to the SAR government. So my question is, do you think you should stay on in your role if the SJ is not setting a straight example? Mr. Kwong, based on Rule 26, brackets 4, the supplementary questions from members cannot include matters unrelated to the main question and reply. I have not diverted. Please be seated. Please be seated. President, please be seated. Mr. Roy Kwong, please be seated. Secretary of Justice, you can choose not to answer the question, but do you have anything to add? I have nothing to add. Dr. Chi-kwong. Mr. Roy Kwong, as I said, Your question is in breach of ROP 26 bracket 4. Please be seated. Please be seated. Please be seated. If you refuse to sit down, your conduct would be seen as disorderly. Dr. KK Kwok. Dr. KK Kwok. This is not a question. Dr. KK Kwok. Mr. James Toh, what is the point of order? President. President. Mr. James Toh. I think you would give me extra time for this, President. This is a point of order. I'm watching the time. President, please allow me to finish. In the main question asked by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG, please raise your point of order. The point of order is for the question just asked by Mr. Roy Kwong. And the relevant, this is related to the question of whether she should step down with the delegations, etc. Mr. Roy Kwong. So my question was relevant, and she merely said that she had nothing to add. So my question is very clear. Are you going to step down, Teresa Chang? This is not a point of order, and the SJ has provided a response. Dr. KK Kwok. President, criminal prosecution should be fair and impartial, and when the previous SJ was in office, that was a public concern already, and the SJ has just come on board, and the public has seen a lot of lies from her already, and she is breaching the laws knowingly. And you talked about criminal prosecutions, and it's important that when making decisions, you instill confidence in the public. Now, the Hong Kong public does not trust that you are an honest person. And yourself might be the biggest stumbling block to judicial independence of Hong Kong. If you are the biggest obstacle and that future prosecution decisions would be affected, would you think that the most responsible decision would be not to assume the role of the SJ so that order could be restored? SJ, thank you very much for the question. When controlling criminal prosecutions, fairness and impartiality are about the system rather than about a specific individual. And when carrying out prosecution work, we must abide by the law's prosecution code, etc. So we should resort to the law in resolving the issue. So this is a very important concept. It's not about public confidence in any individual, but confidence in the books of law. So for criminal prosecutions, they are certainly conducted according to the law. Which part of your question was not answered? For an SJ who lies every single day, who would affect confidence in the public in criminal prosecutions, and if you are the root of the problems, are you still fit in your role? A system is important, but a person should not be worse than the system. You have pointed out your question. Please sit down. SJ, I do not agree that I'm not a credible person, and a system would not deviate just because of an individual. And if the laws and evidence so warrant, politics would not be considered, and the SJ would play by the laws, evidence, public interest, and the prosecution code in making decisions. Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting. Today, we are discussing avoidance of conflicts of interest, whether real or perceived. And the SJ talked about maintaining public confidence in the public or the criminal prosecution system. And one of the issues stem from the unauthorized building works of the SJ. So I'd like to give the SJ a chance to address an important question, so that public confidence would not be further jeopardized. And my question is, it's been revealed that House 4 of Villa de Mer, in the course of the sale of the property, did any property agents inform you in writing or orally that there were UBWs in your property and that there were unregistered alterations? As I have reminded members already, for issues not related to the main reply and question, this would be in breach of ROP 26-4. Please sit down. So, SJ, are you willing to answer this question? Secretary of Justice. I'd like to add to what I already said. Mr. Lam used the words perceived conflicts of interest. I would use the words real or potential conflicts of interest, and I have 2 points to add. For my properties, as I have explained already, I have delegated the law officer, civil law, and director of public prosecutions to deal with the cases to avoid the perceived conflicts of interest. As for the property of my husband, I also delegated the law officer, civil law, and director of public prosecutions. As for the civil or criminal issues in relation to the company of myself or my husband, I also delegated the relevant law officers to deal with them. The SJ has answered your question. Please sit down. Mr. Ray Chen. Mr. Ray Chen. Your question deviated from the ROP, but I still allow the SJ to answer it, and it's up to her whether to answer or not. You could not ask a follow-up question because you deviated from the ROP. Mr. Ray Chen, this morning there were a lot of police vehicles and police officers, as well as barriers, more so than the time of C.Y. Leung. And in case of any actual or potential conflicts of interest, you would delegate the director of public prosecutions. But you did not explain that after the delegation, would the SJ still have any role to play? So my question is, when the DPP triggers the prosecution procedures, would the SJ have to be the SJ's roles have to be suspended or even terminated? The SJ plays a number of functions. If any legal advice involves myself, the those would not, the SJ would not be involved, but the SJ would still have a role in the in terms of the Constitution. She did not answer my question. If the DPP triggers prosecutions in terms of the mechanism, would the role of the SJ have to be suspended? This would depend on circumstances of the prosecution. Generally speaking, if the functions could be separated, the Secretary of Justice still has to continue his or her functions. President, Mr. Ray Chen, you already clarified the part which was not answered, and I allowed the SJ to answer that part, and she already offered a response. Please sit down. Please sit down. Mr. Ray Chen. Mr. Ray Chen, I'm not siding with her. Please sit down. SJ, do you have anything to add? Mr. Ray Chen, if you continue to yell without my approval, your conduct would be considered disorderly. SJ, do you have anything to add? Mr. James Toh. President, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Government bills, first reading. Financial reporting